Back in high school, I wasn't super popular, but I did get along with most people just fine. There was one guy though, let's call him Drew, who didn't like me. We used to be friends, but things went south pretty quickly. It all started over something trivial. Without going too much into it, I made a joke at his expense when we weren't really close enough to do that kind of stuff. He got a little mad, then started talking crap about me. I did the same, and before I knew it, I had a full-blown enemy. One time we even got into a full-on fistfight. I had about 3 inches and 20 pounds on him, so since neither of us knew how to fight, I was able to overpower him pretty easily. I landed a decent shot on him to the chin, then took him down where I held him to the ground. Everyone was watching, and I could tell that he was really embarrassed. I did let him up without landing any cheap shots, but I could see in his eyes that he wanted to kill me. I was in the 11th grade when this whole thing reached its peak. My parents were away for the weekend, leaving me alone in the house. It was one of those quiet suburban homes where nothing much happens, a place where you can leave your door unlocked and not think twice about it. We did lock the doors, but it seemed unnecessary. That weekend, I was up late, binging YouTube videos on the TV in the living room. I guess I lost track of time, because the next thing I knew, it was 2 a.m. I figured it was time to go to bed. I was staying up way too late at the time, so it was hard for me to fall asleep. The last time I looked at my phone, it was 3 in the morning. Just as I was drifting off, a sudden noise woke me back up. It sounded like someone was trying to break in. At first, I thought I was imagining things, because I was half asleep. Then the sound grew louder, and it was unmistakably real. As I listened, it sounded like somebody was in the house. At least one person, and they were coming up the stairs. I grabbed my phone, intending to call the cops, but before I could dial, my bedroom door burst open. 2 people rushed towards me, and in an instant, they were on top of me, pulling me down to the ground. I tried to fight back, but it was no use. There were 2 of them, and I wasn't expecting a fight. They started kicking and punching me, each blow sending waves of pain through my body. I couldn't make out their faces, but I didn't need to. I recognized Drew's voice, taunting me between strikes. His friend, some guy I barely knew from school, was with him. I almost passed out a few times from the beating. Eventually, they stopped, but didn't leave. I looked up dazed and saw Drew, and he was holding a knife standing over me. He almost lunged at me, but the other guy stepped in and stopped him. They argued for a few seconds, then Drew went in for one last kick before they left the room. Lying there, I felt a mix of emotions. Anger certainly, but also a kind of hollow disbelief. I knew Drew hated me, but I never thought he would do something like that. When I saw that knife, I thought Drew was actually going to kill me. Looking back, I think he was probably just going to try to scare me. For whatever reason, his buddy didn't even want that. We all have our limits. For those who are wondering, I didn't call the police. I know he deserved to go to jail, but at my school, you don't call the cops. I'm not defending that idea, but that's how things work. When my parents got home, they noticed the broken lock on the back door, so I told them there was a break-in. They could hardly believe it, because that had never happened before. It technically wasn't a lie anyway, but I left out the rest. As for my bruised face and arms, I told them I got into a fight. That one was a lie. At school on Monday, it seemed that most people knew about it. Word got around fast, and everyone seemed to have their own version of what happened. Some were sympathetic, others indifferent, but every time I passed Drew in the hallway, his smirk said it all. He knew he had gotten away with it. Part of me wanted to keep playing that game with him. I wanted revenge, and I knew I was tougher than him, so it would have been easy for me to pick a fight in front of everyone and get him back. But to what end? It's a dangerous game, and I didn't want to play it anymore. Instead, I tried to let it go. Gradually, life returned to normal, or at least as normal as it could be after something like that. I focused on my studies, hung out with my real friends, and tried to put the whole ordeal behind me. It wasn't easy, but I managed. I learned that sometimes moving on is the best revenge. As for Drew, we never spoke again. He eventually moved on to other targets, because I wasn't his only enemy. I heard he got into some trouble a few years later, and ended up doing some time in prison. But by then, I had moved on, and I was in college. Looking back, I still think about what he might have done with that knife. Maybe it was just to scare me like I thought, or maybe he would have actually used it. Drew was definitely crazy. How crazy he was is the real question. This happened last summer. I have a small townhouse in the downtown part of my city, and I live there by myself. There are 2 floors with 2 bedrooms upstairs. One of them is my office, though. I'm self-employed, and I work from home too, so I spend a lot of time in that house. The ground floor is the kitchen and living room. There's also a basement, but it's unfinished, so I don't use it for anything. The kitchen's at the back of the house. There's a small yard outside that backs onto an alley. It's not the nicest place, and I never really go out there. You see people passing through at all hours of the night, and some of them look pretty sketchy. Maybe I'm being too judgmental, but it's the kind of place that I wouldn't go after dark, even though I live there. My office window looks onto the alley, and you'll see some crazy things out there. I saw 2 guys fighting over a bicycle once. I think one of them was trying to steal it from the other, but I couldn't tell which one was which. Anyway, one of them picked up the bike and hit the other guy with it, swung it right in his face. I couldn't tell how much damage it did, but he went down. I was home on a Saturday night at around midnight, and I was working. It was pretty typical for me to stay up until 2 or 3 in the morning, and I would often work until around midnight. Once I shut down my computer, I went downstairs with my smaller laptop and settled on the couch, then put on a movie. I could still hear the sounds of the nightlife on the street. There was a lot of partying in my neighborhood on the weekends, because we had several popular bars nearby. Suddenly, a gentle knock on my door rang out. I looked over to my front window, but couldn't see anyone. I made my way to the door, peering out cautiously. 2 men stood on the sidewalk, which was about 20 feet from my front door. It must have been one of them who knocked, because there was not enough time to go much farther. They were the only ones near enough. Thinking it was just some lame prank, I dismissed it and returned to my couch. The movie continued, but my focus had shifted. I felt that something was off. Maybe I was being paranoid, but I was feeling uneasy. A while later, a noise came from the back of my house where the door to my backyard was. I sat there and listened for another minute, and then a louder thud came. I got up and looked over, only to find myself face to face with a man. A stranger stood in my hallway leading to the kitchen. I couldn't tell for sure, but I thought it was one of the guys who I saw on the sidewalk earlier. He was wearing a green jacket, and I thought it looked like one of those guys. I quickly ran to the bathroom and locked the door behind me. My mind raced with thoughts of what to do next. From my hiding spot, I heard the man walk to the front door and open it. Then at least one more person came in. They were talking quietly to each other, but there was no way I could hear what they were saying. I dialed the police and whispered my address. The intruders rummaged through my house, but I never heard them try to come into the bathroom. The whole time that I was there, that was my biggest fear. I was listening closely, but eventually, they were gone. I looked at my phone and saw that they were gone within 2 minutes from when they arrived. It was a quick robbery, and I was nervous to see how bad the losses were. I didn't come out of the bathroom until the police showed up. When I did, I found out what had been stolen. They made off with my smaller laptop, which was downstairs. They also took my Xbox and some other gadgets. Other than that, my spare car key was stolen, but I never found out what they could have done with it. Maybe they were planning on stealing it, but that never happened, because my car was in the underground parking garage for my complex. Luckily, most of my really valuable stuff was upstairs and in my office. If my work computer was stolen, then I would have been really screwed. The cops stayed for about 15 or 20 minutes, but I never heard back from them after that night. It seems that it was a random smash and grab type robbery. It was a terrible experience, even though I wasn't hurt. I still can't understand why they would knock on my front door first. If anyone understands robberies better than I do, then please let me know. Maybe it was some way to check if anybody was home. That would make sense though, because I went to the window after they knocked. They would have seen me and moved on to someone else. Maybe it wasn't even them who knocked, and it was just some drunk guys messing around. I don't know for sure. I'm just glad it's over. After years of grinding away in the city, I decided it was time for a change. I had always planned on moving on from my tiny apartment downtown, so when the pandemic hit and my work moved online, I made the move. I had been keeping an eye on the real estate in the rural area surrounding my city for over a year, and then I finally bought my place. It was a quaint little house, 2 hours away in the country. My plan was to retire early and try my hand at farming, maybe make a few bucks at a farmer's market. The house, while not huge, was perfect for my needs. It had 2 bedrooms on the main floor, with no upstairs. There was also an unfinished basement that might turn into a project if I ever needed more space. It was just me at the time, so that was more than enough for a single guy. It had a comfortable lived-in feel, with a spacious front porch that overlooked my small garden. There was a lot of space to expand though, and I was looking forward to putting in the work. One night, it was a rainy evening, no thunder or lightning, but it was really coming down. It was around midnight, and I was getting ready for bed brushing my teeth. As I walked around the house, the sound of the rain rang out. My toothbrush hung out of my mouth as I took a look out of one of the windows. The rain was pouring, but I saw something weird. There, standing around 100 feet from my house, were 2 men. They were just shadows against the trees that lined my property. Beyond them, I could see a car or truck stopped on the road, but I didn't know if it was theirs. At first, I thought they might be my neighbors. Why they were on my property, I didn't know. It wasn't a huge deal if they were just passing through, so I ignored them and went to bed. When morning came, the rain had stopped, but the ground was still wet. I went outside with my morning coffee as I always did. When I stepped onto the front porch, I was shocked. Muddy boot prints covered the entire area, and I knew they didn't come from me. It was clear that somebody had been there. As I walked around the house, there was more evidence that somebody had paid me a visit. When I got around to the back, I looked over to where my bedroom window was. I had a small garden just next to it, and it was trampled pretty badly. I don't know if that was intentional, or if they were going for the window. Whatever they were up to, I managed to sleep through it. Also, I found several cigarette butts around my house and on the porch. I'm not a smoker, and they definitely weren't there before. I knew all of my neighbors. It was a small, close-knit community, and everybody knew everyone else. None of them would do something like that. I was sure of it, so some stranger must have come to rob me. Why they didn't break in, I'm not sure. Perhaps they were looking for an easy target who left their door or window unlocked. They must have given up when they realized that it would take a bit of work to get in. I debated calling the police, but hesitated, unsure if they would take the incident seriously. After all, there was no real harm done, aside from my trampled garden. In the end, I decided to let it be, hoping it was just a one-time occurrence. Then a few nights later, it happened again. I awoke in the middle of the night to a faint noise outside. Peering through my bedroom window, I saw them. Seemingly the same 2 figures, standing outside like before. This time, however, they were closer to the house. I could almost hear their conversation. I called the cops right away. Since I lived in the country, it took a while for them to come. I was starting to think that the police had forgotten about me, so I decided to go out myself and confront the guys. I brought my firearm for safety, not intending to use it, of course. I stepped out of my house, and as soon as I did, the 2 men ran away, but I didn't see their vehicle or anything. They were just gone. The police finally arrived, but since the men were already gone, they left right away. The next morning, I went to the spot where I saw them, and I found more cigarette butts. I'm pretty sure they were the same 2 guys from the first night, but they never tried to break in again. As time went on, I got to know more of my neighbors, and none of them looked like the 2 men that I had seen. I also asked my closest 2 neighbors if anything similar had happened, but they both said that it hadn't. I was a student when this happened, and I was sharing a small house with 2 friends, Tom and Sam. The house was part of a triplex, with our unit and 1 other at the front. There was a 3rd unit tucked around the back of the building. It was a strange building, and I think the back one was an addition. There was a driveway at the side that none of us used, but that's how the people at the back unit got to their place. The one at the back was notorious in our neighborhood. It was a known drug house with a revolving door of sketchy characters coming and going at all hours. When we signed the lease, we didn't know what was going on back there, but after we moved in and the school year began, it was too much of a hassle to move, so we tried to make the best of it. Despite what they were up to, the residents there were oddly cordial, always offering a nod or a mumbled hello as we passed by. I always tried to be polite, but kept my distance. Tom and Sam did the same. One night, my roommates had gone to visit their families, leaving me alone in our house. It was the beginning of the Christmas holidays, and I was staying behind for an extra night. I was sitting on the couch, mindlessly flipping through TV channels. Eventually, I found a movie and settled in watching that. As I was watching, I heard a faint noise from the back of the house. I dismissed it as just another late-night visitor to the drug house. That sort of thing was very common, so I didn't worry, creepy as it sounds. After a while, I was drifting off to sleep, so I turned off the TV, then rolled over on the couch and dozed off. The next thing I knew, I woke up, slightly confused about why I was in the living room. I was disoriented, and initially thought I was still dreaming. When I looked up, I thought I could see a man standing over me, but I didn't believe it. I was still half asleep, and the room was almost completely dark. I looked at the figure for a few seconds, trying to decide if it was real, and I reached for my phone. As soon as I turned on the screen, I knew there was a man standing over me in my living room. He looked like a giant towering over me. I thought he was huge, but that could have been my mind exaggerating. The man looked like he had been living rough. His clothes were dirty and hair matted. I didn't scream or say anything. Instead, I acted on instinct, leaping off the couch and bolting for the door. I didn't look back and didn't pause to think. I just ran, my bare feet slapping against the cold, icy pavement. I ran away from the house, gripping my phone tight. When I was several blocks away, I slowed to a walk and called the police. I paced up and down the street while I waited. My feet were getting very cold. No more than 2 minutes later, I saw a police car. When it passed me, I flagged it down. The officer let me wait in the car while they searched the house. Sitting in the police cruiser, I watched as they took 2 men out in handcuffs. One of them looked like the guy I had seen. The other was shorter, thin, and bald. I had no idea that there was another one in there, because I had only seen the one. When I went back in with the police, the mess was immediately apparent. My laptop was gone, along with a few other valuables. A quick look confirmed that Tom and Sam's rooms had been trashed as well. Lucky for them, they had taken their laptops and other important stuff when they left. I guess that's why their rooms were torn apart. Since the men were caught on the spot, I was able to get my stuff back, but the damage to my friends' rooms was pretty bad. The police asked about our neighbors, particularly the ones in the back unit. They were familiar with that house for the reasons I gave earlier. I told them about that house, about the things going on there. Just to be clear, the men who broke in were not our neighbors. I had never seen them before. However, I thought they had something to do with it. In the days that followed, the police talked to the neighbors, but nothing conclusive came out of it. They denied knowing the men, but I doubt that. We had seen all kinds of sketchy characters coming and going from that place. I find it hard to believe that that was a coincidence. Living in that house after the incident was tough. Every creak in the floorboards and every shadow in the corner of my eye set my nerves on edge. I found myself jumping at the smallest noises. When Tom and Sam came back and saw their rooms, they were pissed. We all helped out to clean up the mess and pitched in some for the damage. My room was relatively untouched. We never found out how they got in. I don't think I left the door unlocked, but maybe I did. There were no broken windows or smashed locks on the house, so that part is still a mystery.